Have you ever heard an Irish person speak and thought, wait a minute, that sounds just like a Scottish accent? If so, you're not alone. Many people around the world, even in the UK, often confuse Irish and Scottish accents. While there are obvious differences if you listen closely, the similarities are striking. But why is that? In this video, we're going to break it all down in a simple, engaging way. From ancient history to modern-day influence, we'll explore why the Irish and Scottish accents seem like close cousins, because in many ways they are. Now let's dive in. To understand why Irish and Scottish accents sound alike, we need to go far back in time, over 2,000 years ago, when the Celtic people ruled much of Western Europe. The Celts weren't a single country, but a group of tribes that spoke related languages and shared similar culture. Two of these groups settled in what we now call Ireland and Scotland. These tribes brought their Celtic language with them. Over time, their languages developed into Old Irish and Old Scottish Gaelic, both branches of the same Celtic language family. So, from the very beginning, Ireland and Scotland were connected by language. Now, let's take a step-by-step look at some of the reasons why both accents sound so similar. Number 1, their shared Gaelic roots. Let's go a little deeper to understand this connection more clearly. The Irish language, known as Gaelic, and the Scottish Gaelic, called Gaelik, are still closely related today. In fact, if you hear them spoken side by side, you'll notice they sound very similar. This connection played a big role in how Irish and Scottish people shaped the way they spoke English later on. Even after the English language arrived in both countries, the native Gaelic accents didn't disappear. Instead, they influenced how English was spoken, especially in rural areas. Think of it this way. The accent you hear today in someone's English often carries the musical tune of the older native language they used to speak generations ago. That's a big reason Irish and Scottish English accents sound related. They're both built on a Gaelic foundation. Number 2, Vikings and Norse influence. The Gaelic roots aren't the only reason. Another group that added flavor to both Irish and Scottish speech was the Vikings. Yes, those fearsome warriors from Scandinavia didn't just pillage, they also settled and mingled with the locals. In both Ireland's eastern coast and Scotland's northern isles and mainland, Vikings built towns, traded, and married into local communities. They brought with them Old Norse words, ways of speaking, and names. Over time, this Viking influence blended with Gaelic speech patterns and helped shape local dialects. So when you hear certain words or sounds in both accents, you're actually hearing echoes of a Viking past. Number 3, the Scottish Highlands and Ulster. Here's another important piece of the puzzle. The movement of people between Ireland and Scotland, especially during the 1600s. Back then, many people from the Scottish lowlands and highlands were encouraged to move to Northern Ireland, particularly the province of Ulster. This event, called the Plantation of Ulster, brought thousands of Scots into Northern Ireland. These Scots brought their speech patterns, vocabulary, and accent with them. Over time, the Scottish settlers in Ulster began to sound a bit more Irish, and the Irish in the area picked up Scottish traits. This created the Ulster Scots accent, which still sounds very Scottish to this day. And in parts of Western Scotland, especially around Galloway and Ayrshire, you'll find speech patterns that sound just like Northern Ireland. So, the constant back and forth between the two regions kept their accents very similar. Number 4, pronunciation patterns. Let's look at some specific sounds that make these accents seem alike. First, the rolled or trilled R sound. Both Irish and Scottish accents often roll their R's, especially in rural areas or traditional speech. This is a trait they likely inherited from their Gaelic roots. Next, the way they say vowels. Irish and Scottish English often use more open vowels, and they sometimes stretch their sounds longer than in English accents. For example, the word goat might sound more like goat or goat. They also have a similar rhythm, almost like singing when they talk. This rhythm is called intonation, and it reflects the musical pattern of the Gaelic languages they once spoke. Even simple phrases like "how are you" might be said with the same lilting rise and fall in both Irish and Scottish speech. Number 5, influence of English rule. Now let's take a closer look at how English rule influenced their accents. During the time when England ruled over both Ireland and Scotland, the English language became more widespread in both nations. But here's the thing, when people learned English, they didn't all speak it the same way. They spoke it through the filter of their native tongue. That's why the Irish learned English with an Irish twist, and the Scots with a Scottish twist. But since both groups had similar Gaelic backgrounds, their English ended up sounding similar too. Ironically, even though English tried to replace Gaelic, it ended up carrying Gaelic's legacy through the accents people used to speak it. Number 6. Migration and shared communities. In more recent history, especially in the 1800s and early 1900s, many Irish and Scottish people moved to the same places, like the United States, Canada, and Australia. They often lived in the same neighborhoods, worked together in factories, and built communities side by side. This helped keep their shared accent features alive and made them more recognizable as Celtic sounding. Even today, you'll find Irish and Scottish descendants in places like Boston or Nova Scotia who sound surprisingly alike. Number 7. Regional accents inside each country. Now, we should be clear. Not all Irish people sound the same, and not all Scots sound the same either. For example, the Dublin accent is very different from the Cork or Donegal accent in Ireland. Similarly, the Glasgow accent sounds nothing like someone from the Scottish Highlands or the Hebrides. But when people compare Irish and Scottish accents, they're often thinking of those more traditional, rural accents, especially from Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. These are the areas where the accents overlap the most. So while there's a lot of variety within each country, there's also a strong zone of similarity between the two. Number 8. The power of sound memory. Another reason people think the two accents sound similar is because of what's called sound memory. Our ears tend to pick up on patterns we recognize, and when we hear something that reminds us of another sound, like that strong R or lilting rhythm, our brains make the connection. To someone from America or Asia, the Irish and Scottish accents might both sound equally foreign. And since they share many of the same sounds, people group them together. Just like how all Scandinavian accents might sound alike to someone unfamiliar with them. Number 9. The media factor. Let's not forget the power of movies and TV. When actors play Irish or Scottish characters, especially in Hollywood, they often exaggerate certain features to make the accent more noticeable or entertaining. But this can blur the lines even more. Some actors do a Scottish accent that sounds Irish. Others do an Irish accent that sounds Scottish. This kind of blending in media can make it harder for people to tell the difference and easier to assume they're basically the same. Number 10. The Hebrides and the Gaeltacht. Some of the most distinct similarities in accent can be heard when you go to the Hebrides in Scotland and the Gaeltacht regions of Ireland. These are areas where the native Celtic languages are still spoken today. In places like Isle of Skye or Islay, and in Connemara or Donegal, the Gaelic influence is incredibly strong. People in these regions grow up hearing both English and Gaelic. As a result, even when they speak English, the sounds, rhythm, and tone of their speech reflect their Gaelic roots. This means that someone from rural Western Scotland might sound very similar to someone from rural Western Ireland. Not because they're copying each other, but because they're both holding on to a deeper, older musical pattern in speech. It's like two ancient instruments playing the same song, even if they're played by different hands. Number 11. Grammar and sentence melody. Now, let's explore something a bit deeper. There's something special about how Irish and Scottish people structure sentences when they speak English. This is called language transfer, and it happens when the grammar of an older native language influences the way a newer one is spoken. For example, both Irish and Scottish Gaelic put a strong focus on verbs at the beginning of a sentence. In some areas even today, people might say things like, "It's going I am," instead of "I am going," or "to the shop she went," instead of "she went to the shop." These patterns affect the melody of their speech, the way sentences rise and fall, and that melody helps make their accents feel similar. Even if people now use standard English grammar, the sound of the old structure still lives on. Number 12. The accent of identity. Accents are not just about history or language, they're also about identity. For centuries, both the Irish and Scottish people were seen as outsiders or underdogs by those in power, especially under British rule. Their accents became part of their national pride. Holding on to a strong Irish or Scottish accent became a way of saying, we are not the same as the English. We have our own voice. And that own voice often sounds similar because it came from a shared struggle, a shared faith, and a shared fight for cultural survival. Even today, people in both countries proudly teach their children traditional songs, proverbs, and phrases that keep that Celtic rhythm alive. Number 13, shared religious and cultural roots. Another reason these accents echo each other is due to shared religion and customs. For hundreds of years, both Ireland and the Highlands of Scotland were strongly Catholic, deeply spiritual, and rural. Life centered around the land, the church, and tight-knit family communities. Their speech reflected their lives, warm, expressive, poetic, and full of rhythm. You'll notice that both accents often sound emotional, even when someone is just asking for the time. They use storytelling in conversation. They use phrases full of feeling, and their tone carries more music than monotone. This shared spiritual and cultural background helps their accents connect on a deeper emotional level. Number 14, the role of isolation. Many rural parts of Ireland and Scotland remained isolated for centuries. This meant that certain speech patterns didn't change much over time. These areas didn't experience the same outside influence that cities like London or Birmingham did. So, when people in Donegal or the Isle of Mull speak English today, they still sound a lot like their ancestors from hundreds of years ago. It's a living time capsule. Because both areas developed in similar ways, rural, mountainous, and close to the sea, their accents grew in parallel. That's another reason why they sound so alike today. Number 15, the Belfast-Glasgow connection. Now let's get more specific. Have you ever heard someone from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and confused it with someone from Glasgow, Scotland? That's not surprising. The Belfast accent, especially among Protestants in the East, has very strong Scottish influence. Remember the Ulster Scots who settled there in the 1600s? Their descendants kept the Scottish sound alive for generations. On the flip side, people in parts of Glasgow, especially in areas with Irish immigrants from the 1800s, picked up Irish speech patterns too. This created a strange but fascinating blend, where a Belfast accent might sound like a mirror image of a Glaswegian one. It's one of the clearest examples of how migration kept the accents closely linked. Even today, Irish and Scottish people share slang terms and expressions that reflect their cultural bond. Words like we, meaning small, I, meaning yes, lass or lad for girl or boy, and craic, meaning fun, gossip, or a good time. These are still used in both places, and they sound similar when spoken with an accent. This shared vocabulary helps make the accents feel like part of the same family, even if they've taken different paths over time. Having understood what makes them sound alike, let's now look at what sets them apart. Now let's be fair. While Irish and Scottish accents can sound similar, there are important differences. For example, Scottish accents often have a sharper, harder edge to certain sounds. You might hear a stronger teach sound, especially in words like loch, as in Loch Ness. Irish accents, especially from the south, can be softer and more musical, with rising tones at the end of sentences. For example, Dubliners may sound very different from someone in Edinburgh. And while both accents often roll their R's, Scottish English sometimes makes the R sound more prominent or even exaggerated. So, while they overlap, they're not identical. It's like hearing two songs written in the same key, but with different instruments. On the world stage, Irish and Scottish accents are some of the most recognizable. Think about famous actors or public figures. Liam Neeson, Saoirse Ronan, and Pierce Brosnan have brought Irish accents to Hollywood. Also, Sean Connery, Gerard Butler, and David Tennant have made the Scottish accent a global brand. When these accents are heard around the world, they often get grouped together because they stand out from American or English accents, and because they share a similar lilt. This worldwide exposure only strengthens the idea that Irish and Scottish speech patterns are closely connected. At the end of the day, when people say Irish and Scottish accents sound the same, what they're really picking up on is this: their shared history, their shared native language roots, Gaelic, their shared geography, their shared rhythm, tone, and musicality, and lastly, a cultural closeness that has lasted for centuries. Even though both countries have developed in their own unique ways, the core of their speech still carries the sound of their shared Celtic soul. As we come to the end of this fascinating journey, we see that accents are more than just the way we say words. They carry stories, struggles, journeys, and joy. And in the case of Ireland and Scotland, their accents remind us that these two lands, separated by only a narrow sea, have always been deeply connected. Whether it's the roll of an R, the lilt of a sentence, or the emotion in a phrase, the similarities between Irish and Scottish accents are not just sounds. They're living echoes of a shared past. So next time you hear someone from Dublin or Glasgow, take a closer listen. You might just hear centuries of history wrapped up in a single sentence. If you found this video fascinating, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves language, history, or culture. Let us know in the comments where you're from and whether you can hear the difference between the Irish and Scottish accents. We'd love to know your thoughts. And remember, we have more exciting videos on cultural differences, surprising history, and the beauty of human language coming soon. So don't miss out. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.